Good evening, and welcome to A Walk with Tilly from a beautiful autumnal evening. Good girl, go on then, on we go. It's a lovely evening. It's been raining for a few days, so it's quite nice to have a pleasant day, and I think tomorrow's going to be beautiful as well. Okay, so today, I think I'd like to order my thoughts about a couple of things that have been happening and are happening. Okay, firstly, I think I'm going to address the elephant in the corner of the room. Brexit. It's back on the agenda again across quite a bit of media, brought on by some of the things that the ex-governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, has been addressing. My concern is that it's such a big question and such a big problem hanging over the UK economy that no one wants to address it. And until people do, we can't move forward. So, obviously that is Brexit. It's a giant hangover, essentially, over the UK economy. It's not improving. It's not going to improve. It's essentially until it's addressed the massive problems, until the people who have told essentially things that are verifiably false. Until the media, from whatever corners they come, are prepared to actually confront people, which I guess is part of the human condition. People don't like doing that. I think it's a difficult thing to confront people when they are essentially lying to you on a continual basis. But what appears to be happening is there are now a pretty massive number of chickens coming home to roost. Essentially, a collection of things that were intimated as being something that would benefit people for voting to leave the EU by a significant number of the major players who have ended up in power are now en masse starting to prove that they were lying. There's no other way. It's not flower around with it. People told categoric untruths in significant numbers. Now, a lot of them would have their particular favourite lie that they would like to propagate, and what that meant is you had a large number of the major players all putting forward suggestions that their particular thing would happen. What that's done is it's given them, if not plausible deniability, they can say to a lot of things, I didn't say that. But by all putting forward, each major player having their own or one or two things that they would proffer that turned out to be completely untrue, that allowed them some wiggle room as these things have collapsed. But they've collapsed. Be aware that there's no... So some of them were willing to just say anything. Okay, let's look at what Jacob Rees-Mogg was one of them, who has continually been proven wrong time and time again. Now, I personally don't think he's probably the most intelligent individual in the world, but he's not an idiot. He went through a very exclusive education system that has trained him well to do certain things. He can argue a case, but now there are things that have happened that where he's undeniably wrong, and he's using ridiculous. He's making statements that are just shocking. He was the person who said everything would be cheaper, pretty much, on leaving the EU. That's not the case. He said there wouldn't be queues in Dover. That's not the case. He even then turned around and said, I was wrong, but for the right reasons. That's just rubbish. He was wrong. It doesn't matter what the reasons were. He said something. He calculated that something would be what he predicted to happen. It then turned out not to be. That's it. You're wrong. The reasons behind it are your personal issue. They're not when you are talking about a political platform that you're telling to millions probably of other people. It's irrelevant. He got it wrong. He got it wrong. He seems to get it wrong on a continual basis, but at no personal cost. But there have been there were multiple different people who were suggesting, among them Nigel Farage, suggesting that this would be the solution to the immigration problems. However, you've created a refugee crisis and a shortfall of labour that is truly shocking, and it is costing the UK economy. Without a shadow of a doubt, there has been a punishing cost to that, and the figures are obvious when you look at the comparisons between the UK and other countries within the G7, which are comparable sort of size economies. Obviously, some of them are massively bigger, but generally that gives you a reasonable idea of our competitors. All of them, since COVID, have recovered and increased all their exports, their GDP. We have zero growth forecast for 2023 now, by more than one different body. Mark Carney and the current Bank of England, Governor of the Bank of England, is suggesting that we're about to have the longest recession for a century. I mean, this is how does it get more disastrous? And these are all policy decisions that have been made that are biting us. So the Brexit has, by the OBR, the Independent Office of Budget Responsibility, the OBR, did calculations, and they worked out that the cost of COVID would be roughly 2% of GDP, which is massive. I mean, this stuff is terrible. And then, on top of that, they have said over the long run that the cost of Brexit will be 4% of GDP, which is again huge. You've got a massive double whammy, and people like Rees-Mogg say, "Oh, I just don't believe the figures," but the figures are proving accurate again and again and again. These people are being proven wrong. So, how long do we listen to them? How long as a society is it acceptable for people who are making economic and political forecasts who are wholly and utterly, irredeemably incorrect in the assertions they're making? How long are they allowed to just continue then making some more? With all due respect, if you keep going long enough, everyone is going to get something right. You could have a 7-year-old, give them a sheet of paper with 50 options on it, where there's a 50-50 chance, roughly, of something going one way or the other. Sooner or later, they're going to get it right. But that's not what we want of our political leaders, our leaders who have influence and are in power. And this is... And they garner public attention in such a way as to have influence, even when they're not in office. They are invited to say things on various different forms of media that are that they're never held to account. So an example might be the Institute of Economic Affairs. One of their representatives was on a BBC political programme trying to suggest that she didn't, like Liz Truss, all the policies that that she bore no responsibility, and the IEA bore no responsibility for those policies, whilst the actual director, the chief of the Institute of Economic Affairs, was on TV saying what a brilliant idea it was. They're making tweets saying that this is what we finally want, we've got what we want. Yet no one is then saying, well, hang on a minute, you've got what you want, and a month later you've literally kicked the UK into the long grass with huge increases in borrowing costs as a direct result of the policies that you've made. It just isn't acceptable. And that these people need to be held to account. My feeling is that there comes a point where 2 strikes and you're out would probably be a reasonable thing, because everyone makes a mistake. But you've got to admit those mistakes. If you're unwilling to, if you keep making mistakes, you never admit those mistakes, deny that there was mistakes in the first place, and are still given a public platform to espouse more things that will be mistaken because everything else you've ever done is, then you're building a society that has no choice but to fail. It will fail. It will cause irreparable damage in the long run. Anyway, that's my little rant over. Look at that. What a beautiful evening. It's so still, look. There's young Tilly. I've got to catch up with her. Anyway, those are my ponderances on the subject. Feel free to interject with your own in the comment section.